All right, hi everyone. Welcome once again. Believe in Bills. Adam Benigni of WGRZ TV, Sports Talk Live Buffalo, and Sal Maiorana of the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle as we begin to look toward the NFL draft as the calendar has turned to April, and some team news as well. So we got a lot to get to once again on this weekly edition of the show. Sal, how are we doing over there?
I am good. Just got back from my third walk of the day with the dog, so getting my steps in, Adam. Still got to do the elliptical after this, so I haven't showered yet, but it's okay. I'm good to go.
All right. Hey, man, you're burning those calories. It's nice, and it's a beautiful day for it, too. Nice.
Yeah,
I feel like spring's finally arriving. Finally.
It is very nice. Sun was out. Temperature was good. Yeah, nice day. Not a great day for baseball, but because I was at the ballpark yesterday. It was actually nice yesterday, but I was there for opening night Tuesday, and it was friggin' freezing. So got to get through this weather to get the baseball season in gear.
All right, so let's hit on a couple of news points with the team, kind of pick up a little bit on what we touched on with the last show, and then we'll get into the draft, which that speculation, it's already high, and it's going to be ramping up as we look toward the end of April. First, the last edition, we had talked how we thought the Christian Benford contract extension was going to be tricky given the value for top cornerbacks in the market. But you know what? Another impressive signing, which has been the major theme this offseason for the Bills and GM Brandon Beane. 4 years, what's really $69 million when you factor in incentives and escalators and all of those things. But another, what appears to me for a guy who's played extraordinarily well, a former sixth-round pick in Benford, an extremely team-friendly deal, which has been a trend given the market at cornerback.
Absolutely. I was shocked when this came down. Like we said last week, because this happened like the day after we taped, I thought this was going to be one of those deals that might take into the summer. And even then, he could have decided to bet on himself, seeing how the cornerback market went in free agency this year, where, Derek Stingley got the numbers are stupid, but they claim it's a $30 million on average extension. Who knows what it really will be? J.C. Horn got $25 million a year. I figured Benford was going to be in that neighborhood if he had gone to market in 2026, assuming he had a good year, and there's no reason to believe he wouldn't. He's one of the best corners in the league. So I was surprised that Beane was able to get this done. And I think, Adam, when you look at it, it probably helped the Bills. He's a sixth-round pick. So even though he's been a terrific player for them, he still has that stigma attached to him, at least as he plays out the last year of that original contract. And then B, the stupid Pro Bowl voters who don't recognize his talent, and I'm not going to say all-pro because he wasn't an all-pro player, but he probably deserved some Pro Bowl recognition, and he didn't have that on his resume. So, the Bills, that actually works in their favor probably when they're doing these negotiations. So they were able to get him in. And, I think he likes being here in Buffalo. He appreciated the opportunity that he got as a sixth-round pick. So a little quid pro quo there maybe. But I was very impressed that they got this thing done. And he's locked up for 4 more years, and he's a very, very good player. So well done once again, Brandon Beane.
So while we're on the subject, and Beane down at the owners' meetings in Florida made it pretty clear that with the Benford extension that their focus now is on the draft. That they're, in terms of free agency, they've done what they've needed to do essentially, and are kind of entirely focused on the draft. But then he doubled back and said that, based on how that goes, he wouldn't rule out, sort of a 1-year veteran, because the big question is who's going to start opposite Benford. They still really haven't answered that. They brought in Dane Jackson, or brought back Dane Jackson. That's a depth signing, right? They need to address that. And you and I have both said that we're not necessarily comfortable with the idea of relying on a rookie to do that. So, is there anything wrong in your mind with like a Rasul Douglas back for 1 more year?
No, I mean, I think, his market clearly is not great. I mean, he's 31 years old. I thought his play dipped a little bit at the end of last season. So it would not surprise me if he hangs out on the market for a little while longer. And, maybe the Bills can do a 1-year deal to bring him back. I wasn't over there for the Benford press conference Friday, but I know some of the reporters asked, have you been in contact? They asked Benford, have you been in contact with Douglas? And he said, yeah, they're still buds, and he would love to have him come back to Buffalo. That could certainly happen. The Bills, they love, they just proved it with Jane Jackson. They love having their own guys back in the building. They know the system, all that stuff that we kind of get tired of hearing about. But, there is some truth to it. So if he's not going to have a market and he comes back at a very reasonable deal, I wouldn't be totally opposed to that. I would rather, you and I have talked about this, I would rather some fresh blood in the organization. We've seen what Douglas can do, what Dane Jackson can do. I wouldn't be opposed to something new, but yeah, that could happen for sure. I'm not going to rule that out at all. And again, I think a veteran cornerback is probably the way to go, unless they, just strike gold in the first round or second round with whoever they might pick. That's the way to go, I think, this year, is to get a veteran back, and it might be Douglas.
In terms of the offseason extensions from that draft class in particular, the one that's notably not done is running back James Cook. And again, we've addressed this a number of times on this show and in other forums during the course of the offseason, but some developments over the last week, as far as Beane was concerned, he kind of says all the right things publicly and doesn't want to get into negotiations through the media, which of course Cook has done. Right. And I think internally, I think there are some people in Bills management pissed off about that. I don't think there's any question.
I think he tweaked a few feathers by doing that, because they don't like to negotiate in the media. The Bills do a very good job of on the team side of not doing it, and generally their players have fallen in line. I think part of it with Cook, Adam, he's got an older brother in the league. His brother went through a contract negotiation where he was a free agent, or no, I think he was up for an extension, and it took a long, long time for the Vikings to finally do it. And then they did eventually do it. He came to training camp the year that was happening, and I think it eventually got done. But he's probably got Dalvin, chirping in his ear a little bit. Sure. Right. Just to pounce when you can, young fella. You're coming off 2 really good years. So I think that might have something to do with it. But he's a running back. I'm sorry. I'm not going to change my opinion on this. 16 touchdowns was great. I don't think they need to extend James Cook. Certainly not right now. Maybe next year before free agency starts, you can try to do something, and they can always franchise tag him, Adam. Mm-hmm. If he has a great year in 25 and they don't want to lose him, they want to get one more year out of him, always slap the franchise tag on him. It'll piss him off, but it's also going to be worth next year probably $14 million. So I think that's where this is going to go. I don't see an extension for James Cook. Again, I was surprised Benford got done so early. I'd be really surprised if they announce in the next couple months that James Cook has been extended.
Yeah, I would be too. Because you don't get a sense there's any kind of warming trend, and you don't want to read too much into things, but, news this week that Cook's put his house up for sale in Orchard Park.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that sort of adds, it could have nothing to do with it. It could easily be a posturing type thing too. We've seen this type of thing before, but there are no indicators that there's any movement toward an extension. And you certainly didn't get that from Brandon Beane at all down at the owners' meetings when he spoke to the media. And I'm fine. I'm fine with, he's going to be highly motivated. And Beane did say this. It's basic economics and leverage. He's going to be highly motivated to produce again in 2025, right?
There's never a reason for a player not to be motivated, because there's always money to gain by playing your best, staying healthy, doing your job. It's, the guys who whine and complain and then hold out like Hassan Reddick did this past year for the Jets, absolutely stupid maneuver, cost him millions of dollars. That doesn't serve anybody any good. So I would fully expect that James Cook, if he doesn't get a deal done before training camp, is going to go into St. John Fisher College and work his ass off, and then try to have another great season and put it on the Bills to say, okay, I've done what you've asked me to do. I've showed you what I've got. Now let's see some I can't say that word. Be reciprocal in this negotiation and give me what I think I deserve. They'll come close at least, but that's exactly what I think is going to happen this year with James Cook.
Yeah, and then, as you had said, the franchise tag for 26 is also
And the Bills don't like they don't like using the franchise tag. I think we said the last time they did was Cordy Glenn before Beane and McDermott even got here. So, it's something they don't like to use. But in this case, it might be, again, if they can't get a deal done, it might be worth it, because then you're still squeezing a 5th year out of a running back. And let's face it, you look around the league, the average depreciation for a running back starts happening right around that 5th year. Mm-hmm. So you get him for one more season at it'll cost a lot of money for the 1 year. I think it's still worth it for the Bills to try to do that.
If he's that dynamic and critical a part of the offense, which he's clearly shown that he is.
And I think he will be. I think he will be, right?
Right. In terms of what he brings to the table, his level of performance and his versatility and all of those things. Yeah. I mean, the franchise tag kind of makes sense, because I was just going to go there. We talked about this Monday night on Sports Talk Live as well with Vic Carucci. What's the shelf life of an NFL running back? And you just hit on that time frame. So, I mean, you got to maximize the talent in the window, and oh, by the way, pay them for what they're going to do, not what they've done. Right?
Absolutely, and it's tough at running back. I understand that it really is a tough thing for running backs, because they're important players in the offense, but because of the position and the churn, they just don't get paid. They don't get long. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott was a classic example of this for the Cowboys. They paid him for past production. He was a great player for them, gave him a ridiculous amount of money. And basically before the ink was dry, his career started going to the tank. So, and that was a great player before they even extended him or gave him the new deal. So you've got to be really wary about how you treat these running backs. Dalvin Cook is another one. James Cook's own brother is another telltale. Had a great time in Minnesota, was a really good player, gets the big money, and he really wasn't the same player after that. So, right. It's a tricky negotiation. I think right now Beane is on the right side of where he needs to be for that.
Okay, lastly, in terms of the owners' meetings and kind of a stadium update, we got a little bit of that from the Bills, and as we record on this Friday, the final piece, all the steel is in now.
Apparently.
So, I mean, we were down there, my wife and I were down there, taking care of some errands, and I've been, by the facility, and I'm just amazed every time I drive by how quickly that thing continues to make progress on that, and it continues to go up.
Well, the good news too is, I had heard, probably 6 months ago, that they were saying that by March, and we're early in April now, but by sometime in late March, probably, it was going to start looking like an actual stadium. By this point, all the inside work still has to be done. There's a million things that have to be accomplished in the next year, but the outside of the structure was going to look, reasonably close to what it's going to look like when it finally does open its doors. And here they are. They've dropped in the last piece of steel on the roof, I think, or the covering at least. Mm-hmm. So now it's all the intricate stuff that has to get done before the stadium is ready. So when you drive by there, if you're in Buffalo and you're driving by, it's going to look like pretty close to what it's going to look like, I think. They'll do all the fine tuning, obviously, but it's there, man. And, you weren't over at the stadium too much this year, but every Wednesday and then on game day, I'd go over there and I'd look over and I'd say, wow, I mean, you could see the progress being made. It's amazing what these guys in construction can do. It really is amazing.
Well, it's so much more complex too than a normal home, but the point remains the same. Like when you build a house, for example, the frame goes up. All of a sudden, once the foundation's poured, boom, like there's a house there. But now the details, and there's a lot of them, obviously, inside with the way this thing is going to be appointed and all of it. That's kind of the nitty gritty. But structurally, it is exciting to kind of see that thing take shape. And I was reminded once again when I saw it, you and I were both last year over in London together for that game at Tottenham Hotspur, and that influenced the design of this one more than any other. And I was very impressed with that one. I had for Channel 2, I had a tour of it the day before, and then for the game itself, with sort of that partial canopy, still the open air, the way in which the sight lines and the seats and the proximity of the fans to the field. It's a big place, but there was a nice degree of intimacy to it. fans close to the action. I was very impressed with that place. And as this
Yep.
continues to take shape, it reminds me of that. And I think it bodes well for how well it's going to serve the Bills into the future.
Yeah, they had told us to keep an eye, take a look, because this is going to be very similar to what Buffalo will look like, and that was an impressive place. So, yeah, it's getting there, man. I mean, this season, it's going to be fun this season to say goodbye to Rich Stadium, as I still like to refer to it as. I'm sure the Bills, Gwelly talked about that a little bit. They're probably going to do some events, some things to say goodbye to the stadium. There might be some alternate throwback uniforms thrown into the mix, so it'll be a fun year over at the old place before they tear it down.
And they should, because you talk about a place with history, and still one of the best game day experiences in the National Football League. I think.
I agree. I think it's
with the
great
tailgating. I don't know. I'm an old school kind of guy when it comes to that. I grew up in the Boston area with Fenway Park and the old Boston Garden. And I was at the old Yankee Stadium, as a Red Sox fan as a kid. I saw the final series, or one of the games of the final series between the Red Sox and Yankees at the old Yankee Stadium before they moved into the new one. So I appreciate, and I think a lot of fans do, all of that history. And I think it's right for the Bills to sort of celebrate that, given all that's happened there and what that place has meant to the franchise.
Absolutely. I was there for the very first game, Adam. August 16th, 1973, preseason against the Redskins. And I was there. My father and I and my uncle and cousin were in the stands that night. So I've got quite a long history at that stadium.
And my last point I'll make, it really, and it's been through some upgrades and renovations and all of those things. But you compare it to other stadiums that were built around that time, the old Foxborough, Schaefer Stadium, what it was called back then. I think that was 73 too. As a matter of fact, that was a bad college. That was bad by college standards, let alone the National Football League through the years. But you look at how well this thing is held up through the years and the way it was designed and all of those things. It's been a terrific place, and it's outperformed and outlasted a lot of the counterpart stadiums that were built at a similar time there in the early 70s. All right. Let's turn our attention now to the draft, which comes up at the end of the month. And again, the Bills, 10 picks total. They picked 30th in the first round. So it becomes really hard to project. But when asked about it down at the owners' meeting, Sean McDermott made it perfectly clear. They are in the market and are interested in adding at the defensive tackle position. And it's something that we have talked about. Glaring is close to the word I would use to describe the level of need they have there to add and upgrade that defensive line. And I think I've been reading your work in the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. If you haven't, you should check it out. Sal's done a really good job outlining some of the options that might be there at 30. And then because this is such a deep class at defensive tackle, they may have the luxury. Look, if they can get the best player on their board's a cornerback, say, for example, in that first round, maybe they go that way, right? And they're able to address the defensive tackle position in round 2. In any case, best case scenario, how do you see it in terms of who might be available, Sal?
Yeah, best case scenario to me, based on what I've looked at highlights and done research on, Kenneth Grant, and that's not going off on a crazy tangent. A lot of people think that Kenneth Grant out of Michigan would be the ideal pick for the Bills. 330 pounds, 6'4". He's a one technique, meaning he's on the nose or shaded off, the center guard, which is where Daquan Jones plays. That's exactly what they have to add. Daquan Jones in the last year of his contract. They need a guy to go in there, be his backup, and then eventually take over that position. Grant looks like the perfect fit for the Bills. Now, whether he gets there or not, there's a lot of, some people have him going in the teens. Some have him, getting down to 30 and below, maybe, then where the Bills wouldn't have to make a move at all to get him. His pro day, his combine, he only did the bench press, from what I recall. It wasn't great. He did better at his pro day at Michigan a couple of weeks ago. So his stock's been kind of going up and down. I think ultimately, if the Bills have a chance to take Kenneth Grant, they should run to the podium and make the pick and not even overthink it. So that's where I would go in the first round if he's available. And to me, he might even be worth trading up a couple spots if you get worried. You're sitting there, the team that I think a lot of people should be looking at for any Bills trade-up scenario is Minnesota at number 24. They've only got 4 picks in this draft, so they could be looking to deal. It's a good team. They don't have a lot of holes. They could be a team that's looking to get some extra picks. That's a spot you might want to look at for the Bills. It wouldn't be going too far, so it wouldn't cost them, a tremendous amount. So that's going to be the flex point, I think, for the Bills is right there if they want to get Kenneth Grant.
Yeah, I guess my follow to that, because I was going to ask you about a trade-up scenario there, and whether you'd also mentioned Derek Harmon from Michigan State, 6'4", 317, Walter Nolan, the self-declared next Aaron Donald, right? Yeah. A 6'4", 296. He might not be the right fit for the specific type of player they're looking at. But, there's a lot of projection and speculation, obviously. Do you see, and I think I've read into your words and your answer to this already, and I think I kind of feel this way based on how I've looked at in terms of Grant, that he'd be worth that type of a move, what it would cost them to move up to, say, 24 with Minnesota and make a deal. And he's that much more in terms of the type of player they need. The philosophical shift we've talked about to acquire that type of player that has the girth and the disruptiveness and athleticism. He brings all those elements, I think, better than anyone else that might be available to them at that spot or in that range.
And that's the thing. We've been saying this right along. They need to add size in the middle of the line. Walter Nolan is a very nice player. He transferred into Ole Miss last year, played on a really good defense. I couldn't believe when I started looking at all the guys at the combine that were on that defense last year. I'm wondering how Ole Miss didn't do more in the. I think they made the college playoff and lost. I forget, but that was a really good defense, and he was a key part of that. But he weighs, I think he weighed in at 296. That's 9 pounds more than Ed Oliver, and we all know how undersized Ed Oliver is. He needs help. So, it's tough. If he's sitting there, if Kenneth Grant's gone, and maybe Derek Harmon's gone too, I don't know if you reach for Walter Nolan at number 30. Maybe it's not a reach. Maybe he's going to be, the right guy, but I don't know. Kenneth Grant weighs 30-some pounds more. I'd rather have that in the middle of the line. If Walter Nolan slipped out of the first round and you haven't gotten your DT yet, then maybe you think about it. But, yeah, Grant for me is the guy they should get. And Harmon would be a nice consolation prize if it came to that.
I was just going to ask you about Harmon before we wrapped up the conversation because, say, they can't get to Grant. But, Harmon seems like a guy, started his college career at Michigan State, finished it at Oregon. And it seems like his stock, this guy's a riser in terms of his performance. What's your take on him?
Yeah, Harmon is a lot like Grant in that I'm not sure I forget what his weight is. I don't have it off the top of my head. I don't think he's quite as big as Kenneth Grant. He might be like 317. Yeah. So not quite as big, but that's a body you could probably put a little bit of weight onto. And like Grant, he also has some upside as a pass rusher in the middle of the line, can push the pocket. I don't think Nolan, I'm not sure if Nolan has that. But Harmon, I think, would be able to do that for you. And again, I'm not really too concerned about pass rush from the one technique. You need pass rush from Ed Oliver and obviously the edges. I want my one technique to just be a plug in the, take on those 2 blockers, clog everything up, be a run stuffer. I'm not overly concerned about that guy getting upfield. And, it's always nice to push the pocket from the middle, but that's not to me the number one thing they need in the middle of that line. And I think Harmon could do that. And I certainly think that Kenneth Grant could.
All right. Good insight. Some names to keep in mind as we get closer to the draft. What you got coming up?
It doesn't have to happen in the first round. This is, you listen to any of these guys, Daniel Jeremiah, any of the Jane Brugler, any of these, draft analysts who I do have respect for because they put in so much work. They'll all tell you it's a very deep class at defensive tackle. And you could certainly get players in the second round. If you don't have a chance in the first round, the board doesn't line up, those guys might be gone. Maybe you go cornerback. Hell, maybe you go wide receiver. Who knows? They've got 2 picks in the second round. They could certainly address this need. Alfred Collins is a guy I really like out of Texas, another big 330-pound beast in the middle. He might be available with that first, second-round pick. A guy who might be a reach at the second round, but is probably certainly a third-round talent, Deion Walker out of Kentucky. He's the biggest one of all. 6'7", 332, I think. Mm-hmm. Those are the kind of guys, and I think they can be coached up. You can teach them technique. I think the Bills, this is a good year for the Bills to be looking for a one-technique tackle. So if it doesn't happen in the first round, I think they can certainly do it in the second round with one of those two picks.
Yeah, you would also mention Tyleik Williams, Ohio State, 6'3", 334. Darius Alexander, Toledo, Joshua Farmer, Florida State. Both those guys are just over 300. But the point is, of the 5 alternate options you had mentioned, if they do select the defensive tackle outside of the first round, 3 of those 5 are above 330 pounds. So they can still find that prototype in the later rounds, given the depth of this draft class, I guess is the point. So it's kind of a luxury. It seems to align with a significant area of need on this roster, the depth in this class.
And it's tricky too, because cornerback is not a deep position in this draft. And, we've talked about they need to get a veteran, but you also need to draft a cornerback in this round. You've got to think about, even if they bring Rasul Douglas back, that same hole is going to be there next year. So it might end up, we'll talk about cornerbacks next week because I'm actually writing about them and I'll know more. But that is another position. It's not a real deep draft for upper end first round cornerbacks. But if one of those guys that I'm going to talk about next week is sitting there, the Bills may have to do that. And then, like I said, get the tackle in the second round.
All right. So we'll look forward to that. Anything else you're working on there on the DNC?
Nothing for the DNC. I'm going to take the weekend off here. I'm revamping my Yankees newsletter and going to a news site. So I'm trying to transition all the subscribers, and it's going to be a very slow process because people don't like change. But we'll see how that goes as the weeks go here. It's going to be a little bit tricky, but
I know
that's where I'm concentrating my efforts this weekend.
You have a very loyal following.
I do, and they enjoy the newsletter because it just pops up in their email. And I'm going to have to convince people that if you change the format, the platform that I'm going to, it's the same content, just a different package, and it's still going to be going to your email. I just got to convince people our age, Adam, who don't like change, especially when it comes to technology. It's going to be a tough sell, but I'll be working on that.
People set in their ways. Us?
They are very set in their ways.
Yeah, you and me both as well. Hey, just a final note. Looking forward to John Scott, colleague at Channel 2, and I will be among those appearing at Frank Reich's Call to Courage breakfast.
Nice.
Tomorrow morning, Saturday morning. Record this on Friday. Dawson Knox, the Bills tight end, is going to be getting that award, which is it's a first-class event. It's at the Hyatt in Buffalo, 9 a.m., I think. There'll be sort of a media roundtable. I think Josh Reed from Channel 4 is going to be up there. I believe Steve Tasker. Chris Brown, the voice of the Bills, is going to be emceeing it. But it's a first-class event. They do a great job putting it on. Frank, it's always good to see him. And he went from having, moving on from coaching pretty much. He and his wife had made that decision that it was time to go to the next chapter. And all of a sudden, Andrew Luck calls him, and he's the interim coach at Stanford for the year. And you know what? If Frank were to have a change of heart, I don't know that he's going to get another opportunity as a head coach in the National Football League, but a guy who has a track record of getting the most out of quarterbacks and helping to develop quarterbacks, which is obviously a very desired skill. It wouldn't shock me to see him wind up after this one-year thing, maybe reignited and back in the NFL, because I think there are a lot of young players he could serve well.
Yeah, that's probably true. But he also could do really well at Stanford, too. What a great place to be a coach out at Stanford. Yeah, it's a cool opportunity. It's weird that it's just the 1-year interim, but maybe he can change Andrew Luck's mind if they have a really good season out there.
Yeah,
so good for him. Frank's a great dude. He's just a great guy, so I'm glad for him.
All-time great. It sounds like they've both resigned. They're going to do a national search and find the right answer long-term, and that both sides want this to be a 1-year thing. But we know how things can change. Yeah. And he's talking about building a culture there and taking the coaches that they have and bringing that whole thing together. And we know that Frank has that capability and the kind of guy he is. So we certainly wish him the best and look forward to seeing him on Saturday morning for the Call to Courage breakfast. So that's going to do it for this edition of Believe in Bills. We're back next week For Sal Maiorana,